Hello there, you're very welcome along to this week's episode of The Group Chat. Zara here in studio, joined by Gavin.
Hello, how are you?
Welcome back from your holidays.
Thank you, yes. It's been restful. But here I am anyway.
And Richard, who ran the Paris Marathon.
Woo,
Yay!
Yes, the absolute garçon.
So we loved following you. Gavin texted me the link the minute you set off, and we so enjoyed it. Did you enjoy it?
I did in the end, yeah. Like I had injury problems in the way, in the build-up, so look, it took longer than I would have ideally liked on it. But it was just a great day.
So brilliant.
It was always all lovely. So yeah, it was a lovely way to see Paris. Streets all closed off. You see absolutely everything. It was lovely, yeah. It's great.
Fabulous. And I mean, tell us what you're passing. The Champs-Elysees, all the...
Everything. You go through the Louvre, the Bois de Boulogne, like you go through, what's the Palace de Vincennes as well. It's really just amazing stuff all the way through it.
Gorgeous.
I think it was the world record for the most people who ever set off on a marathon. It's like 56 or 57,000, yeah. I think that record will be broken by London in a couple of weeks' time, but... It's amazing to be sort of part of something that big.
Enormous, like for a mass participation thing. I know you don't want to get sort of too into it because you're sort of semi-bashful about these things, but we think it's amazing that you're able to do it. So I just want to ask you one question. We're doing how much, when you're doing it, how much can you take in of the sights and sounds? Does it actually, does it sustain you in a way?
Yeah,
because like, there might be a bit of you that's sort of like, can't pay attention, focusing on process and method here. And for people who will never achieve something like that, I'm genuinely fascinated as to whether you can take in how magnificent the surroundings are.
You can, absolutely. Yeah. Like even if you were going on like fast on a bike, you'd be able to take it in. Like you'll see the scenery, like, and you get pushed on by the crowd. The crowd is amazing as well. It has a reputation as one of the best crowds for a marathon in the world, rightly for a reason. Like all the way through on, you have people that are genuine on. It was amazing. Yeah, it's a really lovely way of seeing like a city. So people doing like, signing up for 10Ks or half marathons in cities abroad is a great way of seeing places. So just,
totally. I think as well because the Olympics were there last summer and stuff, to be part of it and to be running in that city after the Olympics is pretty cool.
Yeah, even some of the volunteers who were sort of involved in, marshalling at this time around were involved in the Olympics last year. And it was sort of like a nice way for people in Paris to relive the Olympics in a way as well by having this mass participation thing taking so much of the city. So yeah.
Did you hang on for a bit and have a bit of French food?
I did, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good way of, recovering his carb loading beforehand and then just sort of like knocking back French beer afterwards. So yeah.
Well, richly deserved. We are so proud of you.
The creme was very brulee.
It was very brulee. On to more serious pressing matters, folks, because of course we are relentlessly talking about the housing crisis on this podcast. But in terms of looking at some solutions this week, we saw that Jack Chambers has said there's too much tolerance of housing objections, and he has now announced a new task force to find blockages in the infrastructure delivery system. This is a bit of good news, is it?
It is on the face of it, because any acknowledgement that there are shortcomings or bottlenecks in the system is good, because it implies that there is some kind of political will to address those bottlenecks. If you deconstruct it a little bit, or if you kind of zoom out a bit, it's a little less enthralling. Because firstly, this idea of having this new, what words did you use? This kind of infrastructural sort of task force kind of thing that's now going to exist to try and expedite these things.
The task force.
Sounds very like the thing that the Department of Housing is already setting up, this kind of strategic body, which is now going to make sure that sites already have water and energy connections, so that isn't a bottleneck towards planning, and it's trying to oversee zoning and all of that. The discussion that there's been about the housing czar is the person who's going to be overseeing this new entity in the Department of Housing. So if the Department of Infrastructure / Public Expenditure is also doing one, is that not already then like duplicating a situation, because you've got a too many cooks situation where two different departments are sort of duplicating, or look like from the outside that they are duplicating each other? And one other point is, Sinn Féin pointed this out a couple of days ago. The Department of Public Expenditure, as it then was back in 2018, did something similar where they were like, okay, there's big master plan shortcomings here that we need to properly take stock of, big picture stuff like energy connections and water infrastructure and all those things. And it produced a whole lot of reports about trying to address those things. And here we are in 2025, jettisoning whatever outcomes there were from that entity, that work group, whatever it was, task force, and starting from scratch again. And I'm all for tackling things and being prepared to tackle things, but why on earth would you just kind of ignore that you did all this work 7 years ago and now decide to go back and start with a blank page again if the work was already done, or someone has already spent some time looking at this, trying to come up with solutions?
So are you saying it's like that theory, if you keep doing the same thing, you get the same results?
It's a little bit like, was it old wining, new bottles? Which is a phrase I've never understood, because old wine is surely good wine. So I don't understand why you'd have an issue with that, unless it's corked. but this is that you're just kind of repackaging the same thing, and you're making it look like you're now finally grabbing a bull by the horns, when actually it just seems like you're kind of treading over all the same processes that you'd previously did to no avail.
What do you make of it?
I think they're under real political pressure for very, very early on in the tenure of this government, whatever, 3 to 4 months. a full governance at this point in time. And you already have the Housing Minister, James Brown, doing an interview in the Irish Times a couple of days ago saying, if we don't get this right over the next 4 to 7 months, we're in serious, serious trouble. Now, leaving aside the fact that we're already in and have been long in serious, serious trouble with regards to housing and housing supply in this country, he's not wrong. No. But already the opinion polls, and I saw today the Irish Times opinion poll, some bad news for the government in that, though Fianna Fáil support is holding up. I think the fact that Sinn Féin has rebounded so well from the election shows that people are already looking at this government and are feeling an element of impatience with it. The government went into the election saying we have the answers and you need to be trusted. We've already turned the corner. We're there, and now we're going to see all these houses fly up. And then all the issues around the housing targets for last year and now this year and then the year after, all of them falling well short about what's needed. And now we have, talking about, well, what can we do infrastructure to get things on? Is there planning things we can do? I noted a couple of days ago there was that discussion about the new village just outside Cabra that would be an SDZ, which of course doesn't require as much in terms of objections. This is happening. This is going up.
Bogon, I think they're calling it or something. Yeah.
The problem is that all of this feels like for stuff which is years down the line, and the immediate problem is underlined in terms of what came out of the locked out report from the Simon community today. Only 41 HAP properties or properties accepting HAP for renters who are looking to rent across the country. 41 properties across the nation at a time when we are seeing soaring rents. House prices have not slowed down at all. It's a real big problem. And looking at the long-term infrastructural things, well, that's really important. They're going to get, the housing minister has admitted himself, they're going to get killed if they don't have a solution to this in 4 to 7 months.
The point that you make there is so valid in that, like, even when I saw that headline, it was like 4 to 7 months. It was kind of like, it felt like a kind of.
How do you pick 4 to 7 months?
So
by
random.
the way?
I was like, maybe like people say
I
the
presume
next
they think
6
that
months.
you don't get much commencement over Christmas. That the winter months are just generally not prime building time. So unless you have a good 2025 season, if you like, that's not going to happen that way.
Unfortunately for the housing minister, he will be a hostage to fortune on that 4 to 7 month timeline.
It is. It's very Simon Coveney, isn't it?
Like, he really probably shouldn't have said that. But at the same time, I respect the fact that he acknowledges that he should.
I agree on that.
I totally respect the fact that he recognises the problem, but it's definitely his gig to find a solution.
Well, this I was about to make the observation that maybe, given that the country is already kind of monumentally screwed on housing and has so much of an arrears to try and get through, when he says we're going to be in trouble in 4 to 7 months, is it kind of Freudian? Does he mean we, the government, not we, society, we, the country, we administrators? Like, I think if it wasn't already meant that way, I think it's probably meant as like, no, we politically will be in tremendously hot water if I, James Brown, find myself in the office for about 12 months, having basically presided over the atrophy of the construction system.
But here's the thing, right? And like, look at this from the perspective of a voter, of somebody who's a renter, maybe trying to buy somebody in the box room of the parents' house. Like, what is a reasonable expectation that we can what's a reasonable goal do we think that the government could achieve? Like, I mean, look, let's be honest, right? We're the first ones to say when things aren't working out, and we're the first ones to say, and I know you're saying that they've done these task force before, right? And I accept that. Sure. But what's the alternative? Stop trying. Okay, so there's an element of like, okay, fair enough, right? Jack Chambers has this task force going now, but that task force is going to have to deliver some results pretty rapidly if we're going to meet that target of 4 to 7 months.
What exactly is the task force? Like, what's the aim of the task force to deliver within that short frame?
Like, or in terms of reference, even that's clearly defined.
Yeah, he says here anything that can be achieved faster and more accelerated infrastructure delivery has to be on the table. He said the last number of years have shown how too many individuals have had too much of a say in impeding infrastructure and housing across our economy.
Well, he's right in that objections are a big problem if you're trying desperately to build properties. But it isn't like the government keeps on talking about supply is the only issue, when obviously that isn't the only issue.
No, but
when you have infrastructural problems like water connections has been a massive one in recent times. Like, you need to tidy up the objection system, and that's what we were told the planning legislation from last year would do. That would be solved.
Still possibly 18
We have
months
this revolutionary planning law which is going to fix everything, and we're going to be able to like steamroll through and get houses built left, right and centre. I mean, I do feel that there is probably some call politically to be made here in terms of, we need to cross-party this to try and de-partisan this situation, because it is that much of an emergency, and it has been that much of an emergency for so long. Record numbers of people in emergency accommodation, etc., record numbers of people on housing lists. Do we need to look at things like modular homes more more frequently in terms of actual people on the housing list. We need emergency solutions at this point in time. We have seen in previous crises which have hit this country, whether they be financial or they be pandemics or being whatever, quick things done, which were previously that, we can't do this, we can't do that, this, because it's just like, we don't have the mechanisms to do this. Why can't we just create them? Like, we see examples across the pond about things which you can just do immediately. Now, the government wouldn't want to be compared in any way to what's been happening across the pond in terms of things we can just snap and make happen immediately through emergency powers or whatever. But it really, begs the question why we don't look at things as emergencies in terms of actual, here's this is emergency, let's press a big red button and try
exactly.
and
So it'd be interesting to know what the government's definition of emergency is then.
And like what we saw like 5 years ago, I know we don't like particularly in this podcast, but nobody likes to go over the coals of 5 years ago, but that was an example, and people have now become accustomed to governments when they really want to do something really dramatic because it's necessary for the public or common good, they intervene and they make very dramatic pronouncements and they curtail what you're ordinarily allowed to do because it's an emergency. People have become used to that being the scale at which governments can intervene now. And when they see a new government coming along and sort of what looks like it might be sort of skirting around the edges and going, we're going to have an infrastructural task force now to figure out exactly how you can make these things faster. Like talking about delivery rather than actually putting spades in the ground and delivering.
Now, what I would say, right, in all of this is that like what we're talking about here is like the solution and the problem and how do you get between the two of them. Like, I do think the infrastructural task force, and again, like, sorry, not that I know a whole pile, I'm not in the weeds of this infrastructural task force.
But actually, but that may apply to infrastructure that isn't just housing related. It might be metros and whatever, But like, what I would say is that, like, and we have talked about this in the podcast before, and I've heard from both auctioneers, engineers, people working in the housing business, that planning permission is it is a big issue. It's a massive issue because, I talked about a housing estate that I had been reporting on a couple of months ago where phase 1 had been built and then there was like an objection. Phase 2 didn't get the green light and phase 2 was going to have something like 30 or 40 homes in it. And so it's like, well, if phase 1 was okay, phase 2 is literally just behind that in the same field. How are we not, like, how is it not okay to build that? But again, it comes down to infrastructure, it comes down to water supply, it comes down to, I know there's a lot of factors there. I think the point you make, Richard, is so valid. It's like, if you wanted to, you would. If there's will there, there's a way.
Well, I just feel like we're constrained by decorum and by doing things the proper way of, look, we'll look through this, we'll pass this through it all in left, right and centre, and we'll need to have a long look at things, we'll have the lawyers look over this, that and the other. Times have changed politically, and I don't want to say, like, obviously this can't be the precedent by which everything is done in this country by just by executive order, by the Taoiseach's office or whatever. But at some point you need to say, look, everything's been bailed down in the quagmire here. We have issues in terms of getting new apartments built. That's one of the big problems in terms of the supply for the last year. That's what the government keeps on saying. That completely fell away over the last back half of last year. I don't know what else you need to do, but like, they're very quick to be able to po different ideas, like the National Construction Company and all that sort of stuff that Labour floated. Like,
no one's coming forward with any solutions.
And yes, here's a solution, we shoot it down. I just think that there's big problems, and the societal impact of all of this, we've already seen that, and you don't need us to rehash how many different personal human lives have been impacted by the housing and the homeless issue over the years, but it will have a long-term impact in this country.
If people are, by the way, because I don't know how much of this is visible on the wide shot, but if people are wondering why I keep refreshing my phone, it's because at the time that we're recording this, we're expecting the government to actually publish the number of social and affordable houses that it built in 2024. If they come before the end of the podcast, we'll share them anyway, but they're obviously expected to be a little bit lower. But what has been published today are the commencement figures for new homes for March. And for context, in March of last year, admittedly when there was an incentive for developers to get them over the line and start, 4,900 new homes were started in March of 2024. The number of new homes that were started in March 2025, 723.
Sorry, what?
723. About
what was last year's figure?
About 4,900 homes. So across social and affordable and council, new council builds, private builds, once off, 723 homes had the sod turned in March of this year. An 85% fall on last year. The contention that the government could get anywhere close even to 30 or 35,000 or the 40,000 that they need based on a figure like that. Granted, last year's figures were gamed a little bit. There were artificial incentives for people to turn the sod and then allow a site go dormant. But it's hardly a great, arbiter, hardly a great yardstick for what we're going to be looking at a couple of months or a couple of years down the line.
Well, not when Micheál Martin sat here before the election and said that the solution to the crisis was to build more homes.
Yeah.
Like, build more homes was literally... Well, it is, but like, it's not happening though.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what to say in response to that.
I don't
It's
even
all
think I don't
terribly grim.
Just can we move on really swiftly? I hate to be sort of like, this is not being very negative, but look, the reality is that the country's on course for 29% emission reduction by 2030. Richard, that's way off the 51% target.
Yeah, it was interesting though, because when we were looking at trying how to structure this episode, we were looking at infrastructure and planning issues. That links housing, that links public transport in terms of Luas for Cork, which also is very much linked to the climate plan as well, because public transport is such a huge part of what should be fixing Ireland's climate laggard status. One of the big things which stuck out for me in reading where the climate action plan is landing is the fact that so much of the carbon budget effectively is unassigned. 26 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent worth of emissions have still not been assigned to a particular sector. Now, so much of the debate politically over the last number of years around Ireland's climate targets has been around agriculture, about whether or not that would pull its weight in terms of, because it's such a huge outsized for a dairy and a beef producing country, it has a huge emissions figure. Same with transport as well. For Ireland to say, okay, we're going to be able to reduce our emissions by X amount, and 26 million is going to come from an unassigned, unnamed sector, is kind of worrying. That you can't give clarity to the sectors themselves if that's what they need. And the sectors are always telling us, particularly agriculture, we need clarity on what our targets are and how we're expected to meet them. Putting a big 26 million carbon tonnes hole in the budget and saying, look, we'll fill this in later, isn't particularly great. The transition away from fossil fuels, this is the planning element of it. This is one thing the government wants to do, is to remove any sort of danger of objections coming in terms of renewables. So onshore and offshore wind in particular is the one that they're going to be looking to tilt towards, because there's huge spectrum for development there. You can build big wind farms offshore. Solar and onshore have obviously been a factor in recent years as well, but removing the objection element in this as well, because nothing big in this country ever gets built quickly, and that is why we're still talking about the Metro Link, and it's become almost a joke in so many ways.
Yep. How's that Children's Hospital doing?
It's why there's a question mark over the Cork Luas, and why you were obviously at the launch of that during the week, Zara. Micheál Martin asked about, well, when is this are we ever going to see this actually launch?
But see, unlike his housing minister, he wasn't willing to put a timeline on it, which that's because Micheál Martin's been around. No, like he was asked.
So they had an event where they unveiled the whole route of this thing, and they were like, "This is going to be great now for Cork." And then the first question is, "When's it going to be?" And they're like, "I don't know." I'm
actually fumed because I actually had the brochure. Well, you can see some of the pictures. You can see the route if you're watching on TV here. But I actually had a very glossy brochure. I left it at home. I was going to bring it with me this morning from Cork to outline some of the facts and stats. But the ones that I can remember for you off the top of my head, 18 kilometres it's going to stretch from. This is the proposal from Ballincollig down as far as Mahon Point. It's going to have several stops along the way. It's going to take you. There's O'Cruley Butchers. That's Ballincollig. So you're going to have about 25-minute journey time in, I think it's 25 minutes they're proposing from Mahon Point into the city centre, and then 35 minutes from Ballincollig into the city centre. Totally ambitious. Like, absolutely, look at this. Look, this looks gorgeous. Who would not want this? Everyone would want this. This is brilliant. Well, maybe the person whose pub is proposing. Yeah,
so other than the person who didn't know that his pub was on the virtual tracks and then had his clients calling up to say, how come you didn't tell us the pub was closed? And he was like, what? Sorry?
Yeah, I mean,
because
I wouldn't worry about it.
He didn't know they were proposing to acquire and flatten his pub.
Yeah, look.
But no, they can't tell you when. Because even for stuff that's mythical, that's miles away, like the rail route to Navan, going via Kilmessan. I hope they flattened the place on the way. It's Shelbyville. But at least they can tell you that it's like, it's going to be sometime in the 2030s.
Well,
they can't even tell you that for the Luas and Cork.
Micheál Martin was asked a couple of times when would this be delivered, and he was like, I'm not going to get into dates now, and I'm not going to get tied down to dates. I'm going to be hostage fortune. Ivana Bacik was leaving, and I was about to do a live at 12:30, and she ran over to me really quickly, and she's like, we want shovels in the ground by 2030. Labour wants shovels in the ground by 2030. So she thinks shovels in the ground 2030. I think the construction phase could take up to 10 years. So, it's going to be a while.
Well, this is only consultation for a preferred route. And I know some people in Cork. I know some people in Cork were saying this needs to include Douglas, which obviously isn't going to happen because it's not on the map there. Yeah. But I think the point I was just wanting to make is the perfect can be the enemy of the good in these things. Yes. And while it obviously makes sense that big commuter areas would be included in the Luas system, which is urgently needed in Cork City, the fastest growing city in the country, it's meant to be this, this sort of anchor of growth outside of Dublin to try and rebalance the country so that it isn't all happening in Dublin. You need better public transport because the traffic there is cat, effectively, just like it is in all of our major cities. You need better public transport, but you need to get this started. If you make this a short route, as it is 18 kilometres, just need to get it going as soon as possible. You can look at it then, see what's working and not working once it's up and ready and that is actually running, and you can stick on extended lines as we've done in Dublin. But we need to get things moving. We need to get things moving very, very quickly, and that goes for climate policies as well. Because actually one problem as well in the climate policy that I wanted to mention is the fact that it is very light in detail on the big thing which Micheál Martin says is going to be a growth area for Ireland. That is AI, and that is in data centres. We know so much already about how much AI is a sinkhole for carbon emissions and energy usage, which is obviously expected. We need more of this to come then from green energy in terms of how we fuel these things. But not focusing on it in terms of our climate plan seems like a big mistake then.
I take from your analogy around the Cork Luas is build a house and put the extension on later. Get the house built first.
This was needed yesterday. This was needed yesterday. Galway needs better public transport as well. Dublin needs that metro 30 years ago. It's a joke that we don't have it or that it never got started. And this is one thing that you hear even Pascal Donoghue saying to me a couple of weeks ago when we were asking about the whole tariffs thing and the potential financial uncertainty. We have made so many mistakes in this country by when we come across any difficulty, we stop the big projects. The first thing that goes are the big projects. That can't be allowed to happen because it sets us back. It's why we have our housing crisis in so many ways that we currently have now, is that the construction industry completely stopped over the financial crash and then during the pandemic as well. We can't let that happen again. So hopefully lessons have been learned, to use that really annoying political phrase, that we don't, end up throwing out our public transport, our clean energy and our housing policies as well as a result of any difficulties that may lie ahead.
Now, if you are a student planning on going to the United States this summer, there has been some warnings issued to those young college students about being careful really about spending time in the States, and definitely warnings about activism and maybe avoiding getting involved in activism while they're away. The Union of Students in Ireland has strongly condemned any attempt to restrict the rights of Irish students on J1 visas to engage in activism. But in the same breath, I think that there's definitely been a sense, Gavin, that wouldn't be a good idea.
That basically that although the law is being used as a club with which to beat people over the head in the US, that if you are a student and you want to have the right open to you to go back and live and work in the US someday, you could unwittingly dirty your bib by doing something that you think is completely appropriate, but which the present US administration does not think. So EUSI warning people who might be going to the US in as little as 6 weeks' time, urging them to be cautious and informed about the potential risks involved in activism while on a J1 visa. While activism is a vital part of student life and a right that should be protected, it is important that students fully understand the possible consequences for their visa status, including the risk of deportation, and take steps to safeguard their participation in such activities. The idea that you would be going to a country, admittedly on a visa which is only supposed to be like a short-term working stay visa, but you go to a country that so prides itself on their First Amendment and their freedom of expression, but that if you use it in a way they don't like, they'll simply say, well, we're not having you back again. Like, that's... I mean... It is objectively bizarre how quickly we've gone from taking office of this administration to, like, keep your mouth shut while you're over there on a working visa. Like, it's less than 3 months.
Yeah, I mean,
wild.
Look, there was always like, don't get into trouble while you're away in America on your J1 was always the energy. But like, it's
getting into trouble wasn't like,
it's a different tone now, though, Richard, though, isn't it? This is different.
Yeah, and I think what is a chilling effect, and it has been spoken about in journalistic circles as well as in officialdom, is that, what happens when you're trying to get into America. So this goes for students who are going over on J1s. It goes for journalists who might be going over to cover things in America. It could be officials in the EU have been told to bring burner phones when they're going to the States rather than their own devices. Now, previously, that would have been a policy which existed if you're going to China, because you were going to be snooped on. Because, American officials are now snooping on phones and are looking to see messages have been posted about Donald Trump or about the administration or about foreign policy in terms of Palestine and Gaza. That sort of stuff can be used to stop you from going to the States now, which is, as Gavin says, very much against the First Amendment rights. Very much like just no free speech here whatsoever. The idea, and I've seen it hand waved actually over the last couple of days, saying, well, our J1 students aren't going over there to be activists anyway, or very few of them are. It's kind of beside the point. It's nothing to do with that. I mean, if your social postings from before you go over are going to count against you from going over, well, then that's very much to the detriment of our student population. Like
your ability to go over and work in a diner in Yonkers for a couple of months is not, it's not prejudiced by the fact that you think that America's military support of Israel is wrong or counterproductive, has resulted in countless human misery. Like, that's not a contentious thing that disables you from picking up dishes in a diner.
Yeah.
But they might. Like, why?
Well, it's even actually, when you think about it, and what's kind of frightening about it is that, like, you know, students here who would openly, you know, go to demonstrations, particularly pro-Palestine demonstrations, would openly be outspoken about politics and about how they feel about things. You know, for example, the housing crisis, we discussed it. Those individuals would not be familiar with the concept of having to be careful where they're talking in terms of politics and issues. You know, that perhaps they may not be, you know, someone in innocence may decide to engage in a conversation about politics while away in the United States, which, you know, could potentially escalate into a difficult situation.
But also, at the end, this kind of speaks to a bigger point, which is also bleeding into some of the approach that's been taken now against the likes of Harvard, which is that anything which is seen as being critical of the conduct of Israel or the conduct of America in supporting Israel is now just being construed through this binary lens of, oh, well, that's anti-Semitism. And that's effectively hate speech. And that's what we're not tolerating. And that's why you have situations now where Donald Trump is proposing to withhold billions of dollars of grant funding from Harvard because Harvard has been seen as permissive of pro-Palestine / anti-Israeli conduct protests, which are now seen as, oh, well, that's basically, it's almost undermining national security. Because how could you possibly threaten the right of Israel to exist, or that you're seen as being anti-Semitic for not defending that? Which is, it's one interpretation, but I think for the lens of the rest of us, it seems like it's a little bit of a leap, but nonetheless, that's the territory in which we are. And actually, it's been fascinating in the last couple of days to see Harvard kind of pivoting its defence, not alone to like the right of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, to think that it's completely okay to have those views side by side, but also saying, well, by the way, actually, Harvard's a really good actor and a force for good in the world. And look at all the research we do on oncology and medical research and legal research and in the humanities. Look at all this stuff which is now being held hostage by the Trump view that we are somehow anti-Semitic by allowing protests on our campus.
It does get me thinking, though, and I know like a lot of people had said when Trump was elected that they would be reluctant at this point to go holidaying in the United States, for example. Like, I have a friend who was going to do a big trip to LA this summer, had been talking about it for ages, really wanted to do it, and has now decided, actually, no, I'm not going to go ahead and do that trip because of what's happening over there.
Yeah, 70% drop off actually of Western Europeans visiting the United States in March. So clearly people are, whether that is because they're concerned about something that might happen to them when they go over there and whether they're not be allowed in, or because they just are, they find the policies of the US administration objectionable. It's probably a combination of all of those things, probably the latter more so than the former in terms of the most ready reason why people wouldn't go over there. But clearly it is something which is a concern for people. Just on the point that Gavin makes around, you know, universities now which are being targeted by the Trump administration, foreign students, of course, also being targeted. I think one of the things which Donald Trump said, or his administration said about Harvard, is that they will try and stop foreign students enrolling in Harvard, which is the most prestigious university in the world. It is a huge centre of learning and excellence. And this is basically what this is. This is like, people might see this as some sort of a classic, just left versus right. Oh, this is a left-wing university. And it's not just about, you know, Palestine. This is there's reasons why he's been targeted in terms of just having, you know, it's pumping money into, like, you know, it has diversity and inclusive programs in terms of hiring, which obviously is a huge problem the Trump administration sees everywhere, including European countries, which is something which is quite interesting. Donald Trump and people like JD Vance go over to Europe to lecture people on freedom of speech and then tell European countries that they should change their policies. Is quite shocking.
Only applies if you're a member of the Trump administration.
Yeah, and if you're a news organisation and you say things which the Trump administration don't agree with, will kick you out of your access point to the White House and the Oval Office as well. So freedom of speech is not clearly, you know, universally applied in Donald Trump's America, which is something to say. But just in terms of what this actually means, because Harvard is the first university to stand up, and this is what Harvard has basically said. It's like, we're not going to roll over on all of this. They're going to hopefully get into negotiations on it. But if Harvard doesn't stand up, well, who else is going to? Harvard is a billions and billions and billions of dollars organisation. And it isn't just a university. So this is the point I was trying to make. It's not just about a left-wing university versus a right-wing government. And it's just about, we're going to give the lefties a bit of a kicking. What Harvard contributes is, you know, massive amounts of money, as Gav says, to research. Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston is linked to Harvard. So this is something all of the big universities and states, they pump in huge amounts of money into research and development. America is the power it is in the world because its universities have so much money, have so much time committed to research and development, even on a sort of an informal, casual culture, like Facebook being created on Harvard's campus by Mark Zuckerberg all those years ago. All the big tech companies, they're all created in this sort of incubator that is the American university system.
That Ivy League league prestige is the thing that really benefits America in terms of brand USA as well.
But even from Donald Trump's point of view, even from a non-left-wing point of view, the amount of military research and technology research which happens in American universities, which gives it the edge on the rest of the world, for him then to try and tip the power and be like, look, I want to just basically shrink out our universities, get more people into manufacturing or whatever else he wants people to do. It is really, it's something which is clearly jarring people, even if they don't agree with all of the policies or all of the things which, liberally minded universities are in favour of. Because it is very clear. There are like universities and institutions of learning in the United States, they have a liberal slant. They do. But I mean, this way of addressing it in terms of trying to kick over the most prestigious and most important institutions in terms of excellence, learning, scientific research, cancer research, all these things, is a very weird way of doing it.
Can I make one point actually just about the travel restrictions and some of the disincentives about travel? A lot of it might be because they just think that ideologically that there's something objectionable about the traveller. A lot of it is also apparently just because they are now no longer prepared to give anyone the benefit of the doubt, even about their travel route. People may have seen at the weekend, somebody wrote to an Australian newspaper, an Australian resident, who was flying to Miami with a view to taking a cruise that was leaving Miami. And they were denied because they had flown from Sydney via Hong Kong and JFK. And when they landed there for immigration to the US so that they could go on a cruise and leave the US again, they said, that's an unorthodox route. We don't trust you. And they said, well, I have a loyalty deal with my airline. And this was just the way that they put it. It was the cheapest route I could get. They said, nah, doesn't hold up. And they denied that person entry to the US, meaning that the 15 grand cruise that they'd already pre-booked leaving Miami, they just couldn't make. And there are other cases that have been documented of people on media visas, like the ones that we all hold, that we occasionally go to the US with, who land, or other like standing visas like that, and who land there and are told, oh no, we disagree now, or we were skeptical about your travel plans, or we think you've got a second phone and that you've been talking to drug dealers. It's like, no, we don't. But then you get as far as US soil and they turn you around and they say, and they basically get you deported back again. At least in circumstances like ours, were that to happen, touch wood, let's all hope it never does, because it's entirely spurious reason to keep you out of the country. At least in cases like ours, you might be doing it from Dublin, which has pre-clearance, and if you get denied entry, you can drive back home. If you end up flying to the US with a view to then having immigration when you land, and they just don't like the look of you, or they find some spurious reason to say no, they turn you around, and that's thousands lost or whatever else. I mean, at least we have the relative inconvenience of being able to drive home again afterwards. For most of the world,
definitely,
not so much.
It's definitely a godsend. The queue is long, but it's worth doing it. What was it like for you? Did you find you were, out of the three of us, you're the only one that's been to the States since Trump was elected?
Yeah, and it felt very, very much kind of a holding pattern that I think I don't like this phrase anymore, but the rubber hadn't really met the road yet. That I think people who are Trump supporters, not that there's many of them living in the DC region because it's an overwhelmingly Democrat district, but any Trump supporters sort of felt like, well, no, our goal and the America that we've modelled for ourselves is a work in progress and it will take time to deliver. And DC and most of its residents and people who were Harris voters or people who were previously Biden supporters said, well, whatever, we don't know which way this is going, but we know this is going against us. So everyone was sort of like waiting to see how it began to manifest before they really knew what the country was going to be like. I suspect a month on, they've got a slightly firmer idea of what it truly is.
Well, the starkest demonstration of the immigration system and the so-called clampdown that Donald Trump is putting in place is really seen in El Salvador. He welcomed the El Salvadoran President Bukele to the Oval Office there the other day. And both of them revelled in the fact that El Salvadoran prisons, and not just prisons as we understand them here, terrorist confinement centres are now being used for people who are being deported from the United States, people who have been marked out by the Trump administration as dangerous felons and gang members, members of MS-13 and other cartels are being thrown away into these El Salvadoran CCOT is what it's called, the terrorist confinement centre. But one case of one man, and actually there's a couple of different cases actually which have been flagged at this point in time by people who are denying that they're in any way linked to any illegal activity. But Kilmar Abrego Garcia, he is a Salvadorian immigrant himself. He arrived into the United States in 2011 illegally, as the Trump administration would see it, in terms of he didn't have proper papers paperwork. He was stopped, initially arrested in 2019 outside a Home Depot, where he says he was soliciting work. ICE agents, who are the immigration officials in the US, asked him about a murder. They asked him whether he was part of a gang. Now, he has never committed a crime. His record under Homeland Security, under any immigration or any sort of criminal records, he has no criminal record whatsoever. But he was picked up again in March of this year. He lives in Maryland with his wife, who's a US citizen. They have their parents to... she has 2 children, I think, from a previous relationship. They have a son of them, their own, who is deaf in one ear, is also autistic. There is other, extended needs amongst those other 2 children to whom he's a prime caregiver as well. So he was effectively rounded up on the 12th of March, questioned about gang affiliation, deported on the 15th of March on one of the three of these flights to El Salvador, where he's then thrown into a terrorist holding cell. Again, never committed a crime. No due process. The US Supreme Court says that because the Trump administration has already acknowledged this was an administrative error. An administrative error sees you deported and put in one of the most dangerous places you could possibly go in the world. And actually, the process of when he was initially detained in 2019, a judge in that process says the one place he cannot be sent to is El Salvador, because he is under risk of being targeted by a gang there.
He made an asylum claim and he didn't quite get asylum, but they said they couldn't be deported either. The one place that you cannot be sent back to.
Back to the most dangerous possible place.
Yeah. Because they were like, oh, well, you're a national of El Salvador because he's a citizen from there. But he literally fled because he reckoned that his life was in danger because of crime in his homeland anyway. And although he wasn't granted asylum, they did say you can't be kicked back again. They kind of gave him a kind of a quasi legal status where they simply said the one place we can't send you is El Salvador, and they did it anyway.
So critics of the Trump administration are always saying this is a very dangerous thing, that not just Kilmar Abrego Garcia and other people like him, but also I think it was 200 Venezuelans who were sent to these El Salvadoran prisons as well to CCOT. Effectively, this allows Donald Trump to deport people, eventually could potentially apply to American citizens, because that's what he asked the El Salvador president in the Oval Office. He says, what if they're homegrown criminals? You'll need to build 5 more of these prisons because we're going to keep on sending them to you. And the Trump administration has dug its heels in over this. They say they effectively can't get this man back. They can't get this man back out of El Salvador, that it's a matter for El Salvador. El Salvador's president has described this man as a terrorist, which he is obviously not, and says we won't be smuggling any terrorists back into America. But this is for critics of Donald Trump, even conservative ones. This is a really dangerous sliding down a path whereby if you are a political opponent of Donald Trump, potentially, you might end up in this potential position. American liberty and the respective due process has been slid over here, no matter which way you shake this. And the fact that the Trump administration is defying not just, the court which said you can't send this man to El Salvador, not just defying the Supreme Court of the United States, but also all norms, mean this is going to be a fight which is going to be very interesting to watch over the time ahead.
Richard, we were chatting, all of us amongst yourselves this week, just about, I suppose, the situation in Gaza and what's been happening. And one of the things that you raised concerns about is the lack of coverage, or the reduced level of coverage that it's been getting in recent weeks.
Yes, because organisations, including the United Nations, now say that what's happening in Gaza is the bleakest point in terms of the humanitarian situation and in terms of the geopolitics situation that we have seen since October of 2023, when all of this kicked off. Effectively, the Israeli military, as we've said previously on the podcast, is not allowing aid in whatsoever. I think we're 6 weeks into that blockade now, which is an appalling situation for civilians, mothers, children, families who are all in this situation without aid, with basically no working hospitals at this point in time because they've all been obliterated. They're all sitting there in a position where their lives are being dwindled away. And all of this time, there are negotiations trying to get off the ground still in Doha, trying to sort of say, well, can we resurrect that ceasefire? And there's been no progress on that. And why there's also been no progress on that is because Israel has changed its policy with regards to Gaza. And what they've done in terms of changing the policy is they have now decided, and the defense minister has said, that effectively we need to have troops there longer term. Indefinitely, we will have troops based in security corridors, as they've described it, in Gaza. And what they're effectively proposing at this point in time is cutting off the city of Rafah, which obviously is the Rafah crossing. It's
the main crossing.
Yeah, in the southern end of Gaza.
That's the only way in or out by land.
Apart from through Israeli territory, as it stands already. So effectively that would be gone. That will be gone. If Rafah is now part of the security buffer, which is going to be taken by Israel, and it's not going to be given back for people to live in, much of it has already been bulldozed or wiped off the map. Rafah, of course, you'll remember from last year, All Eyes on Rafah was this huge social media phenomenon. It was actually almost around this time last year, Gav, I think it was, wasn't it?
Around 12 months ago, I think, yeah. People might remember this AI-generated image, which was all over the place on Instagram, the All Eyes on Rafah image, which you just couldn't move without seeing. 12 months on. Basically close to not being a Rafah anymore.
Yeah, Rafah, this city which first appeared in texts 5,000 years ago. This is an ancient city, has been effectively eroded off the map. It's now considered part of the Morag corridor, which the Israeli military is seizing. The Israeli military is effectively proposing seizing about 33% of Gaza for use as buffers. Now, we already know how tight, how densely packed Gaza is as a place. That effectively cuts it off as a livable place in many ways, bar Gaza City and Khan Yunis. Those are the only main urban areas, and everybody's going to cram into them. And they keep on saying, well, we're trying to live up to Donald Trump's policy of, allowing the voluntary migration of people out of the Gaza Strip. Now, I was reading in The Economist actually as well during the week that this is part of their take on this, is that this is an expansionist Israel. It wants more of this territory to be subsumed into Israel. It also points to, in Syria, the Golan Heights, more Israeli troops have taken over Syrian territory there, as well as in southern Lebanon, where they're not moving back there as well. So this is a dangerous escalation in terms of the situation in the Middle East. Also in the West Bank, there is talk in the Israeli government about annexing more of that territory, which is currently, some of it is under the remit of the Palestinian Authority. So while all of this is happening, ceasefire talks are going nowhere. Honestly, there is no ceasefire anymore. And a lot of people are looking at this and saying, well, if this is the most dangerous time in Gaza, no aid is getting through, the hospitals are out of order, the city of Rafah is being subsumed into a cordon by the Israeli military. Well, why isn't this getting as much coverage as it did at the start? If this is the most dangerous time, and it probably very much is. I think it was Médecins Sans Frontières during the week said that now Gaza is turning into a mass grave for Palestinians and for the people who are coming there to try and aid them. We've seen Irish people, of course, doing important work in hospitals and whatnot. It's becoming a dangerous position for them to be in too.
I read a headline which said, Katy Perry back on Earth after reaching space, and a comment underneath it said, is she though? Let's take a listen.
Fair call.
I feel super connected to love. So connected to love. I think this experience has shown me you never know how much love is inside of you, like how much love you have to give, and how loved you are until the day you launch.
I love that Katy Perry feels loved. I want to feel a bit more Katy Perry. But in all honesty, what did you make of this? I know, but now just be gentle.
I'm trying to choose my words here. I mean, okay, so she was in the definition of she was in space for 11 minutes in this Blue Origin.
Just under 11 minutes.
Just under 11 minutes on Jeff Bezos, one of the world's richest men. His latest wheeze to send an all-female crew into space for 11 minutes.
His girlfriend.
And she's come, herself, Gayle King, and Katy Perry all went up there.
Kissing the earth.
Kissing the earth as if she'd, that was an old John Paul II move, wasn't it? He always used to do that when he got off the plane. Yeah. But as if it was like for them to come back and to talk as if, they'd been on some sort of, amazing expedition and home sweet home and all that after 11 minutes. I've been on bus journeys like 5 times as long as this around Dublin.
There was VAR checks in the Champions League this week that were longer than their space
11 minutes did kill me a bit as well. I thought they were gone for hours.
I think just people have an objection to this, and there's been a lot of backlash to this, which has been quite forceful, I think, just because a billionaire spending lots of money, emitting huge amounts of carbon on a vanity project, which had no scientific bearing whatsoever, no scientific mission, is a really, really it's a weird way of dressing up, feminism and girl bossing as it was described on the internet. And I can see those objections. I can see why people say them.
Go on, Gavin.
No, just I thought actually I saw a certain amount of pushback against the idea of girl boss, and that people were almost celebrating the idea that this wasn't being held out as some sort of great female achievement because it was effectively just a publicity wheeze, and it's almost refreshing just to recognise that being the case. I actually wanted to read for people who might not have seen it. William Shatner was on a similar kind of a touristy thing. I can't remember whether he was on one of the Bezos ones or one of the Elon Musk ones, but the way they have their whole...
Yeah, producer Garrett says Bezos. So he was on a Bezos bus tour.
There you go, the bus tour. He was there for 11 minutes as well. But William William Shatner associated with Star Trek and the whole thing, you know, at age 90 something, gets to go to space and expects it to be this kind of like great visceral moment where he sort of feels like it's in a sense of accomplishment, and actually came down with this tremendous sense of grief, because what he thought would be this incredible, you know, adventurous expanse of space was actually cold and sterile and lifeless. And from space, he was able to see the warming bosom of Earth, and suddenly felt very aggrieved at all of the dreadful harm that we're doing to the planet. Things that took our species, that took 5 billion years to evolve, suddenly we'll never see them again because of the interference of mankind. It filled me with dread. My trip to space was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it felt like a funeral. Yeah. That's the proper response to have.
What did you make?
Not I feel connected to love, like speaking live, laugh, love AI slop that she came out with instead afterwards.
So we have 60 seconds left, but I want to leave the final word to a woman who has West Cork connections, Emily Ratajkowski, who said she was one of the most vocal critics of Katy Perry. She said, apparently referring to the singer's statement that she had dedicated her participation to Mother Earth, Emily Ratajkowski wrote, "You say you care about Mother Earth and you're going up in a spaceship that is built and paid for by a company that is single-handedly destroying the planet." So West Cork woman weighs in on
the worst part was that she sung in space. You know, in space, no one can hear you scream. I really wish I couldn't hear Katy Perry.
The little Daisy was because her daughter's called Daisy or something.
Oh,
I have to say, like, I did think that Katy Perry like knew where the cameras were and knew her angles, and I admire a hun who knows.
Yeah, this isn't anything personal to Katy Perry. They could have sent anybody up there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like, space travel shouldn't just be for an Instagram clip. Like,
yeah,
should be a bit more than reels.
Okay,
on that
note,
there you go.
Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back again next week.
Yes.
Have a good Easter.
Bye, everybody.
And enjoy all the chocolate, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.